The tribute they threw away, the crystal vase shattered across the marble floor before Serena could even understand what had happened. Shards scattering like cold stars at her feet as the echo rang through the grand hallway of the estate she had cleaned since childhood, her worn maid's apron still damp from scrubbing floors before sunrise. And in the glittering fragments she caught the satisfied smile of her cousin Melina, whose elbow had clearly struck the table moments earlier, yet whose voice now rose sharp and accusing, calling Serena clumsy and worthless loud enough to summon the entire household. And as always, explanation would be useless because truth had never protected her in this family. So Serena lowered her eyes and whispered an apology that tasted like dust. Just as Aunt Beatrice swept in wrapped in silk and outrage, Uncle Gerald close behind with his familiar look of irritation, followed by cousins who gathered not with concern but with anticipation, as if cruelty were entertainment. And once again Serena heard the same story repeated, that her mother had abandoned her, that feeding and sheltering her had been an act of charity, while Serena bit back the truth she had learned too late, that her mother had died of fever months after leaving her here, a fact they hid while turning her into free labor who slept in a storage room smaller than their dog's kennel. And as insults piled on, Uncle Gerald's gaze drifted toward a sealed black letter resting on a side table, its crimson wax marked with a sigil every noble family feared, the symbol of the vampire kingdom, and the hallway fell quiet as he spoke of the king's demand for a human tribute before sunset, a single young woman of noble blood. And in the silence Serena felt her heart sink because everyone knew such tributes never returned. Their deaths whispered about as warnings, and when Aunt Beatrice weakly suggested sending a servant, Gerald coldly explained lineage would be verified, then turned his calculating eyes toward Serena and declared that through her mother, she carried just enough noble blood to qualify. And in that moment Serena understood she had been chosen not out of duty but convenience, because her life was the easiest to discard? As Melina quickly agreed, calling it brilliant, Thomas adding that Serena had no future anyway, while even Helena, who had once slipped her extra bread, turned away in quiet guilt, and Serena's voice trembled as she begged for time, for mercy, for anything, only to be told this was her chance to finally be useful, to save the family. And 2 servants were ordered to drag her away as wine was opened in celebration behind her. No one mourning, no one looking back, and as cold water scrubbed years of grime from her skin in the preparation chamber, Serena watched the sun begin its descent through a narrow window, realizing she had 6 hours left in the world she knew. And as they dressed her in a simple white gown meant to make her look pure and willing, a strange calm settled over her, because the thought crept in that death among monsters might be kinder than life among relatives who smiled while sending her to die. And when the final ribbon was tied, Serena made a silent vow that she would not cry, not beg, not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. And back in the entrance hall her family gathered not to say goodbye, but to ensure she left. Aunt Beatrice fussing over her appearance like she was a package, Melina mocking her impending death, Thomas joking about how quickly the king would drain her. And when a deep, inhuman horn sounded outside, even Uncle Gerald flinched, the massive doors opening to reveal 2 armored vampire knights whose presence pressed down on the air itself. And as Serena was pushed forward and introduced as a willing offering, something inside her refused to shatter. So when asked, she lifted her chin and spoke clearly, saying she was chosen, not asked, but she would walk on her own feet because there was nothing for her here anyway. And laughter like wind through graves filled the hall as the knights admired her honesty, offering her a carriage pulled by ember-eyed horses. And as Serena stepped outside without looking back, a small hand suddenly pressed a faded ribbon into her palm young iris, whispering that Serena had once given it to her when she was scared, and that small act of kindness nearly broke her. But Serena closed her fingers around it and climbed into the carriage, the gates closing behind her as the sun dipped lower, carrying her toward a fate everyone assumed was death, unaware that the girl they threw away was about to change the destiny of a king, the king who refused to sacrifice the carriage, crossed the threshold between realms as the sky darkened unnaturally fast, the air growing heavy and cool until Serena felt each breath echo inside her chest. And when the wheels finally stopped before towering obsidian gates etched with ancient symbols, the vampire knights opened the door and motioned for her to step out, and though her legs trembled, she obeyed, gripping the faded ribbon in her palm like an anchor as she was led through a vast hall lit by coal blue fire where nobles watched from shadowed balconies, with eyes that glimmered like embers, whispering about the human tribute who had arrived to die. And at the far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from black stone and silver veins, sat the vampire king himself, still as a statue. His presence so overwhelming it felt like gravity had shifted, pressing Serena downward until every instinct screamed at her to kneel. Yet something deeper urged her to remain standing, and when the knights announced her name and lineage, the hall fell silent, the king's gaze settling on her with a weight that made her heart race. But instead of hunger or cruelty, she sensed a sharp, unsettling focus, as if he were measuring not her blood but her resolve. And when tradition demanded she bow and offer herself, Serena swallowed her fear and spoke before she could stop herself, saying she had not come willingly, but she would face whatever judgment awaited her without lies. And a ripple of shock moved through the court, nobles hissing at her audacity. Yet the king raised a single finger, and the sound vanished instantly. And in that stillness he descended from the throne, each step deliberate, his eyes never leaving Serena's face, studying the way she stood despite trembling, the way she met his gaze without defiance yet without surrender. And when he stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the chill of his power, he asked one simple question in a voice low and controlled. "Why do you not beg?" And Serena answered honestly that begging had never saved her before, and if she was to die, she wished to do so as herself, not as something broken, and for the first time in centuries, something like surprise flickered across the king's expression. Because humans begged, screamed, lied, but this girl spoke truth as if it were armor. And he turned slowly to his court and declared that there would be no sacrifice that night, that the human would not be drained, consumed, or discarded. And gasps echoed through the hall as he announced that Serena was now under his direct protection, naming her his treasure until he decided otherwise. A word that carried ancient weight and meant ownership to some, sanctuary to others, and to Serena it meant she was still alive, though she did not yet understand why. And as nobles protested, claiming tradition and balance, the king silenced them with a glance and reminded them that peace between realms was maintained by his will alone, and that will had just changed. And Serena was escorted not to the dungeons or ritual chambers, but to a quiet wing of the castle, where she was given clean clothes and warm food, simple but abundant, and as she ate slowly, half expecting someone to snatch it away, she realized no one yelled, no one mocked her, and no one demanded gratitude. And later that night, as whispers raced through the castle about the foolish human who had enchanted the king, Serena lay awake staring at the high stone ceiling, wondering if this kindness was only another test, another cruel delay before death, while elsewhere the vampire king stood alone at a balcony overlooking the dark forests, replaying the memory of her steady voice and honest eyes, unsettled because he had felt something he had not felt since losing his queen centuries ago, a pull toward humanity, fragile yet unyielding, and when his advisors warned him she might be a spy or cursed, he dismissed them because he had sensed no deception in her blood, only exhaustion and quiet strength, and he ordered that she be treated with respect, watched but unharmed. And when Serena was finally summoned to meet him again before dawn, she expected interrogation or punishment, but instead he asked about her life, her work, her mother, listening without interruption as she spoke of years spent serving people who never saw her. And as the first light of dawn filtered through the dark glass windows, the vampire king made a decision that would alter both their fates, because in saving a girl meant to die, he had begun to remember what it meant to protect rather than rule. And Serena, who had entered the vampire realm as a sacrifice, realized that the monster everyone feared had shown her more mercy in one night than her own family had in a lifetime. The child, the language, and the secret that woke the court morning in the vampire castle arrived without birds or bells, only a gradual thinning of darkness, and Serena woke to a quiet so complete it felt sacred. Her room warmed by a small hearth and guarded by silence rather than fear. Yet whispers followed her as she walked the corridors later that day. Nobles watching from a distance as if she were a puzzle placed among them by the king himself. And though she kept her head lowered, she refused to shrink, offering polite nods and small kindnesses where she could, helping a nervous servant steady a tray, soothing a frightened stable beast with a soft voice. And it was that voice that carried her fate into the royal wing when a cry echoed down the halls, announcing that the king's child had collapsed, the young heir pale and shaking despite the presence of physicians who murmured spells and remedies that failed one by one. And Serena found herself pulled forward by instinct rather than command, slipping past tense guards until she stood at the edge of the chamber where the king knelt beside the bed. His composure cracked by fear he did not bother to hide. And when Serena felt the child's burning skin and uneven breath, something stirred in her memory. A song her mother used to hum on nights when hunger and cold pressed too close. A lullaby in words Serena never understood but had carried like a charm. And before doubt could stop her, she sang softly, the ancient syllables flowing as naturally as breath, and the room stilled as if the air itself listened, the child's breathing easing, the tremors slowing, while the physicians stared in disbelief because the language Serena spoke belonged to the first dynasty, a tongue reserved for royal blood and forgotten rites. And when the king looked up at her, shock cut through his fear, replaced by a sharp, searching intensity. And as the child finally slept, the court erupted into suspicion, nobles whispering that no mere maid could know such words, accusing Serena of sorcery or deceit, yet the king silenced them and ordered everyone out, leaving only himself, Serena, and the sleeping child. And in that quiet he asked where she learned the song, and Serena told the truth that her mother sang it, that she never knew its meaning, only that it brought calm, and the king turned away. Because the melody belonged to a royal oath sworn centuries ago, a vow meant to bind protector and people, and its echo in Serena's voice unsettled him more than any threat ever had. And soon rumors spread through the castle that the human treasure carried secrets dangerous enough to reshape alliances, making Serena's days tense with scrutiny, yet the king placed subtle protections around her, assigning guards who obeyed her requests rather than issuing commands, granting her freedom to move within safe wings, and offering explanations instead of orders. And Serena noticed the change in him too, how he listened when she spoke, how his anger cooled faster in her presence, how he stood slightly closer when nobles grew cruel, and though neither named it, respect began to bridge the distance between power and vulnerability. And the mystery deepened when Serena discovered a faint mark on her wrist while washing her hands that night, pale as moonlight under skin, matching symbols carved into the oldest stones of the castle. And when she showed it to the king, recognition flashed across his face, because that mark belonged to a human line sworn to the vampire crown, guardians whose blood carried echoes of ancient pacts. And Serena realized her mother had not been merely poor or forgotten, but hidden, protecting a legacy meant to be buried. And as the king explained the history, carefully without condescension, Serena felt something shift inside her, a sense that her life had not been meaningless suffering but preparation. And yet danger grew with the truth, rival nobles plotting to use Serena as leverage, to claim she was a threat or a weapon. And when Serena overheard whispers of punishment disguised as tradition, she chose courage again, standing before the court to declare she sought no power, only safety and honesty. And the king, watching her speak without fear, felt an old vow awaken. Because she did not ask him to save her, she asked him to let her stand, and that request, simple and brave, bound them more tightly than chains as the child stirred peacefully behind them, living proof that kindness, not cruelty, had preserved the realm that night, the mark, the truth, and the choice to stand the castle grew heavier with tension after the truth of Serena's mark spread beyond the inner chambers. And though no one dared challenge the vampire king openly, whispers followed Serena like shadows, some calling her a blessing, others a threat, and the king responded not with rage but with structure, assigning Serena clear protections and clear freedoms so no one could twist her presence into rumor. And for the first time in her life, Serena experienced what it meant to be given choices rather than commands, choosing when to walk the gardens, when to help the servants, when to sit quietly with the king's child whose laughter now followed her like sunlight in a place long ruled by night. And each small decision strengthened her confidence, because respect, she learned, could rebuild what years of humiliation had broken. And as days passed, the king explained more of the forgotten pact. How long ago humans and vampires stood on the brink of endless war until a human woman spoke for peace, binding her bloodline to the crown with a vow of balance and compassion. A vow the court later buried in favor of fear and dominance. And Serena realized her mother had carried that history in silence, hiding her daughter in plain sight among people who mistook kindness for weakness. And the revelation brought both pride and grief. Because if the family who raised her had known the truth, they would have exploited it, not protected it. And Serena felt a strange relief knowing her mother had chosen love over power, even if it meant a hard life and as rival nobles tested boundaries. Challenging Serena's presence with thinly veiled insults and political traps, the king responded with calm authority, removing those who crossed lines and warning others that harm toward Serena would be treated as harm to the crown itself. Yet he never spoke for her when she wished to speak, standing beside her instead, and that distinction mattered, because Serena began to realize she did not want to be hidden behind his power. She wanted to earn her place within it. And the turning point came when news arrived that Serena's family had learned she lived, panic turning to greed as they prepared to travel to the vampire court, claiming devotion they had never shown, and Serena's old fear threatened to return, memories of being silenced and blame tightening her chest. But the king did not command her to face them or shield her without consent. He asked what she wished to do, and that question changed everything. Because Serena chose to stand, not out of revenge but out of truth, deciding she would no longer let others define her story. And when her family arrived dressed in false humility, tears rehearsed and lies polished, the court watched closely as Serena stepped forward, calm and steady, recounting years of labor, insults, and the moment they selected her life as a shield for their comfort, and the room fell silent not because of outrage but because honesty carried weight here, and the king listened without interruption, then delivered justice not with spectacle but with precision, stripping the family of titles gained through deceit, exposing their fraud to every house, and ensuring they could no longer harm servants or hide cruelty behind status. And when Serena was offered the chance to demand punishment, she surprised the court by asking instead for protection for the youngest cousin, who once showed her kindness and fair treatment for those they had abused, proving that compassion did not mean weakness. And the king, watching her choose mercy without surrendering dignity, felt something settle into certainty because she had not been shaped by power. She had shaped power itself, and as the family was led away in shame, regret etched into faces that once mocked her, Serena felt no triumph, only peace, realizing that justice did not require cruelty to be complete. And that night, standing on the balcony beside the king, Serena thanked him not for saving her life but for letting her speak, and he answered honestly that she had saved more than his child. She had reminded him why a crown existed at all, and in the quiet between them something unspoken grew, not rushed or claimed, but chosen, as two souls who had learned that true strength did not come from fear, but from the courage to protect what was gentle in a world that preferred the dark. When regret knocked and the realm chose sides after Serena's family was removed from the court in disgrace, the vampire realm did not return to calm, because justice has a way of exposing fractures long hidden beneath obedience. And rival houses began to move openly, some claiming the king had grown weak by protecting a human, others arguing that Serena's presence threatened the ancient order that kept vampires supreme, and Serena felt the weight of those eyes wherever she walked. Yet she did not retreat, continuing her quiet work among servants and guards, listening, learning, offering help without assuming authority. And it was in these moments that the realm began to choose her, not because the king commanded it, but because she treated everyone as if they mattered, and still danger gathered. Because those who profit from cruelty never forgive the one who reveals it. And soon whispers reached the king of a plot to seize Serena during a council gathering and force a public judgment that would either strip her protection or spark civil conflict. And when the king learned of this, his first instinct was to hide her, to lock every gate and place her beyond reach. But Serena, sensing his tension, asked for the truth, and when he told her, she surprised him by refusing to disappear, saying that if she hid, the lies would win, and if she ran, others would suffer in her place. And for the first time the king hesitated, not out of fear, but respect, because Serena was no longer the girl carried into his realm as a sacrifice. She was someone who understood consequence and still chose courage. And the day of the council arrived beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds, nobles filling the hall with sharpened smiles and polite threats, and Serena walked beside the king, not behind him, feeling the hush spread as eyes locked onto her, some burning with resentment, others with hope. And when accusations were finally voiced that Serena manipulated the king, that her bloodline made her dangerous, that humans could not be trusted with influence, the hall waited for the king to silence them. But instead, Serena stepped forward and asked permission to speak, and when it was granted, she told them she did not seek power, that she had lived her life without it and survived, but she would not accept a world where cruelty was tradition and kindness was called weakness. And she reminded them that the peace they enjoyed had been built on an oath spoken by a human woman long ago, an oath they had buried because it demanded restraint. And as she spoke, murmurs spread, because history, when spoken aloud, has a way of waking those who benefit from forgetting, and some nobles shouted for her removal, calling her a threat, while others lowered their heads, recognizing truth they had ignored. And when the tension reached its breaking point, a rival lord attempted to seize Serena, revealing the plot openly, and the hall erupted as guards moved. But before chaos could claim the room, the king rose, his power pressing down like a storm, declaring that any hand raised against Serena was a hand raised against the crown, and the would-be captor was restrained, his allies exposed in the process. And in the aftermath, the realm stood divided. But something irreversible had occurred, because Serena had faced the court without fear, and the king had stood with her without domination. And later, as lightning split the sky outside, Serena found the king alone in the throne room, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders, and she spoke softly, saying she did not want to be the reason his realm fractured, but he answered that the fracture had always existed, and she had merely revealed it, and in that quiet exchange, trust deepened into something stronger, a bond built not on passion or possession, but on shared responsibility. And the king confessed that he feared loving her because love made rulers vulnerable. But Serena replied that vulnerability had been her life, and it had not destroyed her, it had taught her what mattered. And when news arrived that Serena's family was begging for an audience, desperate and afraid after losing protection and status, the king turned to Serena once more and asked what she wished. And Serena, after a long breath, said she would see them, not to reopen wounds, but to close them, and the decision echoed through the realm, because mercy offered freely holds more power than vengeance ever could. And as the storm outside began to clear, both Serena and the king understood that the final test was not whether she could survive the darkness, but whether the realm could learn to respect the light she carried, the crown offered, the choice made, and the justice that remained. The final audience was held at dusk, when the sky burned gold and violet beyond the high windows, and Serena stood in the great hall with a calm she had earned rather than borrowed, aware that every step she had taken from maid to protected guest had led here, And when her family was brought in, stripped of borrowed finery and false confidence, regret hung from them heavier than chains. Uncle Gerald's voice shaking as he pleaded that everything they did had been for survival. Aunt Beatrice claiming fear had guided her cruelty. Cousins avoiding Serena's eyes as if guilt might burn them, and Serena listened without interruption, because she had learned that truth did not need to shout. And when they finished, she spoke simply, saying survival never required humiliation, fear never excused betrayal, and family was not proven by blood but by how one treated the powerless. And the hall remained silent as the Vampire King delivered his final judgment, confirming the loss of their privileges, binding them to restitution for those they harmed, and ensuring protection for the youngest who had once shown Serena kindness. And when the family was led away, their pleas fading into echoes, Serena felt a quiet closure she had never imagined possible. Not because they suffered, but because the cycle had ended, and the realm turned its attention to the greater decision still waiting. Because rival houses had been exposed, the old pact restored to memory, and the balance between fear and compassion stood at a crossroads. And in the presence of the court, the Vampire King did something no ruler had done in generations. He spoke of choice, admitting that power without restraint rotted from within. The peace maintained by sacrifice alone was not peace, and that Serena, through courage and kindness, had restored what had been forgotten. And then he turned to her and offered a bond not as ownership or destiny, but as partnership, offering the crown oath that would make her queen by respect rather than blood, with full freedom to refuse. And the hall held its breath as Serena considered the weight of what was being asked, remembering nights on cold floors, the sound of broken glass. The moment she walked into darkness, believing it was the end, and she answered slowly, saying she would accept only if the bond protected humans and vampires alike, if no child would be chosen as a shield again, if mercy and accountability would stand together. And the king agreed without hesitation, sealing the oath before witnesses, and the mark on Serena's wrist glowed softly as ancient symbols awakened in the stones, not in conquest but in recognition, and the realm felt it. A shift that did not crush but steadied, and threats that had gathered melted into reluctant acceptance or quiet retreat, because authority had chosen fairness and strength had chosen care. And later, away from ceremony, Serena stood with the king overlooking the forests, their hands not entwined but close, learning the shape of trust without haste. And he confessed that loving her did not weaken him, it clarified him. And she replied that standing beside him did not erase her past. It honored it, and together they began reforms that protected servants, limited abuses of tradition, and reopened dialogue between realms. Not perfectly or easily, but honestly, and the court learned that justice could be firm without cruelty, and mercy could be offered without surrender. And when stories spread beyond the castle walls, they were no longer about a sacrifice that died screaming, but about a maid who walked into darkness and returned with light, and about a king who chose to protect rather than consume. And in time, Serena visited the places where she once worked unseen, not to remind others of their shame, but to ensure no one else was made invisible again. And the realm changed in quiet ways that endured, because fear had lost its monopoly on order, and kindness had proven its strength. And as the sun finally set, Serena understood that destiny had not been something done to her, it had been something she chose. Step by step, word by word, until the world listened. And the Vampire King, standing beside her, understood that true power was not taking what one could, but guarding what one should, and together they faced the future not as monster and victim, but as partners bound by respect. And the regret of those who once threw her away became a warning etched into memory rather than a wound reopened, because justice had been served without becoming injustice itself, and the realm endured stronger for it. Remember this: when you treat someone as nothing, you may one day watch them become everything. And by then, your regret will come too late.